Good evening. Welcome to this evening's edition of the Evening Review Show. My name is Jemima Beatrice, your host for this evening. Today we are speaking to Maxmillant Katjimune. He's the youngest elected member of Parliament in the National Assembly. We are talking to him about his maiden speech. He's just joined Parliament after a dispute that the PDM found itself with some of its members of Parliament. Now, thank you for joining us, Mr. Katjimune.
Thank you very much, Jemima, and thank you very much for inviting me and to the listeners as well.
Mr. Katjimune, you delivered your maiden speech this week. Now, for the benefit of our viewers who did not tune in during the National Assembly proceedings, can you just share with us some of the highlights of your speech?
Well, Jemima, my maiden speech was delivered during the debate on the motion on youth unemployment that was tabled by the Honorable Ina Hengari. So basically my speech was centered around the question of youth unemployment in this country, which is at alarming levels if you read the statistics. And also it's quite a personal issue to me as a young person as well. As you would know, I also graduated from the University of Namibia in May, on the 17th of May of this year, alongside some other 3,000 students from UNAM. I hear that another 2,000 also graduated from NAST, another about 1,500 graduated from IUM, and this is in addition to the other thousands of others who graduated from Triumphant, from all our numerous other institutions of higher learning accredited by the NQA. So these predominantly young graduates are now going to join the unemployment statistics. I think the last figure that was provided last year was that the youth unemployment rate in general was expected to reach 60% by the end of 2021, and that represents around more than 270,000 unemployed young people in Namibia, and that figure could be much higher. So my maiden speech generally was, just highlighting the scourge of youth unemployment in general, and these young graduates now will now be forced to join the government and private sector, where they will be, subjected to exploitative internships with no guarantee that they will ever get a job from these internships. And I also particularly highlighted in my maiden speech that this notion that has been adopted by government, that internships are a catapult to young people gaining employment, is actually a fallacy, because there is no scientifically proven method that internships lead to sustainable employment for young people. So while we do appreciate that internships are perhaps a necessary tool in terms of transferring skills in industries, it's actually fallacious to contend that young people must first do internships and then get employment, because there's no scientifically proven fact to say that if you do a particular internship, you will then gain employment. In fact, I contended in my maiden speech that internships are just a temporary tool to a very permanent problem, which is youth unemployment. We're just using internships, just to rubber around the tap, while we actually know that the problem is that there are no jobs, and then now we just have to come up with this notion of internships to sort of, lessen the burden on unemployed young people.
Now, Mr. Katjimune, you've been, before going to Parliament now last month, earlier this month, you've been part of student politics and movements. Obviously, this issue is very close to your heart. I mean, it should be very close to your heart as a young person. What do you think is the panacea, the solution to youth unemployment in this country? And where is it that you believe government is failing, if you believe that government is failing?
Well, Jemima, I think let's put things into perspective. I think the undeniable reality in the first place is that the economy since 2016 has not grown. This was further exacerbated by budget cuts and austerity measures that was introduced by the Geingob administration around at the end of 2016. It went into 2017 and still continuing, where thousands of jobs, even in government, are still, not filled. Businesses in the private sector are not performing as they used to do prior to the period 2016. And really, this has had an enormous effect on the entire job market as we know it. That is an undeniable reality that, number one, the economy is not performing. There are no jobs. The private sector, which depends on government tenders, is not performing because of the austerity introduced by the Geingob administration. That is the first undeniable reality, and we cannot deny that. So in order to solve this problem holistically in the first place, we need to address the issues of the economy not performing. Why is the economy not performing? And let us start first there in the first place. Secondly, the issue of youth unemployment in particular has its own dynamics and particularities. And it starts from our basic education system. as we all know, since 1990, our education system was designed to throw young people into the streets without skills and at a very young age. Since 1990, hundreds and thousands of young people exited the education system in grade 10 and grade 12 without the necessary skills and without very little recourse. You know, thousands of people every year since 1990 were failing grade 10. We don't know where they ended up. Thousands of them exited school in grade 12. We don't know where they ended up. And this is now manifesting in this huge unemployment crisis that we have at the moment. So the problem really around youth unemployment, it started in our basic education system in the first place. But even those who managed to pass grade 10, to pass grade 12, and then enter the institutions of higher learning, even those ones, government did not create a market for them to be absorbed after they graduated. For example, we are told a couple of years ago that government now created the School of Veterinary Sciences at Newdam. It's moving now to main campus. Government created schools such as Sam Nujoma campus in Hendy's Bay and a number of other interventions. But we find that these graduates, which government sold to us as necessary skills in the economy, even after they graduate themselves, they are not having jobs, which means that there was a lack of research and a lack of and a mismatch between what government wanted created and the actual job market. I can tell you now, when the first cohort of veterinary science graduates graduated from UNAM, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, those students had to come to the office of the leader of the official opposition, Honorable Henry Venani, to beg him to ask questions in parliament as to why they had not gotten jobs. And we're told that these students were the ones that the economy needed. Even engineering students are not having jobs after they graduate, which means that there is a monumental failure from all aspects. And thirdly, Jemima, government has now this pivot that says that young people must create their own jobs. But even in terms of that, government is not creating the necessary financial assistance to young people in order for them to thrive in businesses. We learn from countries such as Singapore, which has an incredibly low youth unemployment rate of 7.3% when compared to the rest of the world. It's incredibly low. And this is because the Singaporean government takes decisive intervention in terms of the youth unemployment crisis. There is a set database of matching skills and the market. There is also financial means for young people who want to venture into business, such as the ACE scheme, which grants every young person who has an incredible business idea with about 50,000 Singaporean dollars to venture into business and to create employment for others. We do not see those interventions here in Namibia. So in summary, Jemima, the issue is three-legged. Firstly, we know that the economy is not growing. Secondly, our education system is a problem because we are throwing a lot of young people into exiting the basic education system. I now get it that they exit at grade 11, but they don't have any tangible skills, and you don't know where they end up. And then lastly, we have inadequate financial support, even for those young people that government says that they must create their own employment.
Last year, perhaps earlier this year, there was a paper by the African Union, and it was and some of the findings was that political findings and observations from young people at grassroots level is that political leaders, instead of helping these young people to get jobs or to get into development areas, they are instead using these opportunities for themselves to get themselves to positions like leadership. What do you make of this?
Well, it is absolutely true. You know, when one analyzes this rhetoric by politicians that we must create our own jobs, we actually don't see how they are backing up these statements with real interventions. And that finding by the African Union, you know, supports that narrative that politicians actually don't have any means as to how they would support young people financially into entering the business sector, and that they're just actually using that as a pivot for them to benefit themselves and get these opportunities.
You earlier before this question, you said that we are learning from Singapore and that there are several interventions. I beg to disagree with you. We actually we have some of these measures have been introduced. The development bank, agri bank for young farmers. We have the startups these days as well, and several others. Why is it that we don't see this?
Well, Jemima, you know,
bearing fruits? Because some of them have been introduced at least 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, Jemima, I want to answer that question on a two-legged approach. Firstly, these opportunities, who are they advertised to? Do they really reach the young person on the ground that needs these interventions? Because I have often seen that these interventions by the Development Bank of Namibia and other sectors actually reach a very small elite circle of young people who are connected to political leaders. I would not want to give examples, but consistently I see that the beneficiaries of this program are young people in urban spaces who are often from very privileged, from semi to very privileged backgrounds and who are connected to political leaders. So does this funding really reach the young person in Okakarara, the young person in Rundu who needs this particular funding to really uplift himself and his family from generational poverty? Or is it schemes that really just reach the already urban rich and don't reach those who really need it? Secondly, when government sort of encourages this notion that we must be job creators and not job seekers, they do not take into account economic history and the particularities of the Namibian economy and the Namibian population, the Namibian job market. There is only so many businesses that you can start in a country of 2.5 million. So that is a very fundamental factor to consider. So government cannot be saying to be heavily reliant on this notion that, oh, young people, we must start creating our own businesses, because the Namibian population already dictates to you that the population is so small that we can only absorb so many businesses at once. And that is why you get that even in cases where we are funding young people to start their own businesses, these businesses fail because there is simply a lack of a market. We don't have a market like Nigeria where you have 200 million people readily available to buy your product, or China 1 billion to buy a product. China does not need any other market. They are a market themselves. But in Namibia, if you give 1,000 young people 500,000 to start their own businesses, where is the market? So these are the dynamics and economic history that we have to consider in terms of the Namibian job market.
Okay, let's go for a quick break and then we come back and we elaborate on that question.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Welcome back. Now, before we went for a break, we were talking about the unemployment, youth unemployment in Namibia, the challenges, especially the fact that Namibians do not have a market, and that we see businesses starting up and they close after a very short time because we don't have the young entrepreneurs do not have a market to sell their products to. Now, Mr. Katjimune, let's so while we're on that issue, let's go back to my earlier question. So what is then the solution? When the government is struggling to create jobs, when we have the opportunities that are in fact there, in your view, trickling down to only connected few, so where does this leave the greater majority of Namibian youth and you as a leader? How do you then address this issue?
Well, as I already alluded to, Jemima, the problem is structural. And when we are addressing issues, politicians, we politicians, because now also now part of the club, have a habit of throwing concepts around. Yes. Very nice theoretical concepts, but issues are usually very structural. And that is why I said we have to address the issue on the three-legged approach. Firstly, you cannot address this crisis without addressing the issues of the economy. First, let us grow the economy and let us get the economy in an upward trajectory in the first place. Since 2016, this economy has not grown. And even by sentiments advanced by our Shadow Minister of Finance during his reply during the budget, we are not seeing an indication when the economy will start picking up. So government has to come together and really see put interventions together to ensure that the economy starts growing in the first place in order to catapult jobs in the economy and to resuscitate the private sector and fill all these hundreds of thousands of vacancies that are in government currently. Secondly, we have to address the education system. We are simply throwing out too many young people into the streets without no skills and without adequate recourse. We must conduct comprehensive research as to where are these young people going, what do they need in order for them to be productive citizens of society and to land a job somewhere in our markets, because we don't have any statistics as to what is happening to our young people that are leaving the education sector. And thirdly, we have to really have a delicate relationship between institutions of higher learning and the market. I think we have taken the approach that institutions of higher learning, they have no role in terms of the job creation job creation equation, and then they just offer education and just release graduates into the market. I think perhaps we have to come to a conversation where we see how can we bring together the higher education system and the private sector in order to really synergize these two sectors, in order to create a synergy between the various programs that we're offering at our institutions of higher learning and what the market is actually needing in that particular point in time. And this is what I think developmental states in the Asian tigers, such as Singapore, such as Japan and China, have really been able to do quite well in terms of synergizing the higher education system and also the basic education system in relation to the job market at that particular point in time and its dynamics and particularities. So those are the three-legged approaches that we have to take in order to holistically not only address the issue of youth unemployment, but the issue of unemployment in general. Youth unemployment, unemployment is not only a youth problem. Yes, it's a holistic problem within all stratas of the population. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have to address those three issues in that manner in order to address the issue holistically.
Now, Mr. Katjimune, you are one of a handful of young people becoming a lawmaker, yet there's this feeling, you are on Twitter, young people are on Twitter, they feel young people are not doing enough, in fact that they are oftentimes even more quieter than some of the senior politicians. What can we expect from you, given the fact that you're in a delicate position, given your the situation with the PDM, the fact that you had to seek legal recourse to get your position in Parliament, and there's a feeling that young people, when they're in situations like this, they have to toe party lines. And so how are you going to go about as a young MP?
Well, Jemima, that's a very fundamental question. Yes. And I want to start saying by saying that having young people in spaces such as Parliament and etc. was long overdue, because the demographics of the day in Namibia and Africa dictate that young people should in fact be dominant in these spaces. I want to give you a statistic. In Namibia, the average age in Namibia is between 15 to 24, the average age. The average age of a parliamentarian, if you take cumulatively between our National Assembly and our National Council, is between 55 to 65, which means there is a generational clash of 44 years between the predominant demographic in the country and your lawmakers, which translates into a generational conflict between these two demographics. And that is why it's so important that we started this project of really pushing young people into spaces such as Parliament. And I must actually applaud my political party, the PDM, for starting this this trend, because as you know that it was my president, the Honorable Henry Venani, that first nominated me to be part of his 5 names for the list of the National Assembly. He then also nominated Honorable Ina Hengari to be part of the same list. And then this trend sort of continued with other political parties nominating young people into their list as well. So we must be grateful for that. Jemima, to answer your question particularly.
But why? I mean, if you're young people, you have electorate out there, people who deserve to be in Parliament, why should you be grateful?
No, I said we must commend the PDM for seeing that the demographics of the day needed a parliamentary representation. And if really the PDM had not started that trend of really putting young people at the fore of our party list and so forth, that trend could not have perhaps, transcended into the other political parties and these other appointments as well. So we have to be grateful for that and applaud, the Honorable Mekhendri Venani for having that wisdom and that fortitude to really put young people in spaces such as Parliament. But to really answer your question, Jemima, is that we must be cautious of overly relying on this, the fact that you have young people in Parliament, and then automatically they're going to be representative of the issues of the day. In as much as we have young people in Parliament, it is very important that we hold them accountable. If me, Max Katjimune, I'm there in Parliament and I'm sleeping and I'm not speaking to the issues of young people, it is very important that I'm called out. We have for long, even in South Africa, there was the trend started in the 2019 elections when fees must fall, activists were appointed in Parliament such as Nompendulo Mkhatshwa and these people. But it didn't necessarily translate that they stood for the issues of young people in Parliament. And this is due to these notions of, towing the party line and so forth. So in as much as we young people are in spaces in Parliament, we have to be truthful to the demographics that we are representing in Parliament, and we have to always stand steadfast on their issues, even at times when we do not toe the party line. You might remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, when there was a controversy around whether marriage in rape, there is marriage in rape or not, and so forth. And I was very proud that 2 young people in Parliament, the Honourable Ina Hengari and the Honourable Patience Masuwa, stood up against that stance, even though that stance came from our own member of Parliament in the House, which means that we as young people, in as much as we are there representing political parties, we are also mindful that our first and foremost responsibility in that Parliament is to stand for the issues of young people, even at times when we go against our party stances. So it's very important that we stand true to that till the very end.
So President Hage Geingob recently he's repeatedly said that Namibians or young people should not only be job seekers and that instead they should create jobs. And you made remarks on this. You responded to this. Can you please elaborate why you felt the need to respond to that?
Well, the President has numerous times has very insensitive statements around the plight of issues facing young people. And that statement, disappointingly, it was made at a function where he was supposed to engage young people. And the best he thought to say was that government is not God and you must create your own jobs, which is a very insensitive statement to say. We all know that the President himself, I don't think he has also ever created his own business. Perhaps he has one at the farm. And this statement is further exacerbated by our 76-year-old Minister of Youth, a career politician who has also never created her own job herself. And we find these are very insensitive statements. You do not, as a political leader, say such statements to an issue that is so sensitive to hundreds of thousands of young people. And this whole issue that, Ramaphosa has also adopted that pivot that, young people must create their own jobs, government is not creator of jobs. And also now Geingob is repeating those same statements. It's actually infactual. There is no government in this world that has tackled the unemployment crisis without a developmental approach where the state really intervenes, and sets the bar as to how the crisis can be solved. And we have seen this consistently in countries such as Singapore, such as China, the Asian tigers, where governments, in terms of crises such as this, they intervene and see how the crisis can be mitigated. We cannot leave it to the hands of the market to see how the unemployment crisis must be solved. The government has a very critical role to play in terms of the unemployment crisis. And this is one issue that I felt I needed to address in the speech, because the President is being very insensitive with that statement, and because he knows that government actually has no clear ideological and practical solution to the issue of unemployed young people in this country. And let me warn people, you Jemima, that having so many unemployed young and frustrated, hungry young people in this country actually poses as a security threat to the relative peace and stability that we have enjoyed in this country. We know that as scholars of politics and sociology, that it was always the young, hungry and frustrated and unemployed that have started revolutions, that have started revolts. So having a situation where we have 60% of would have been productive citizens sitting at home hungry and frustrated, it actually poses as a security risk. And that is why, in the political sense, it is so prudent that we address this issue with the urgency it deserves, so that we avoid other crises that might arise.
Mr. Katjimune, as we wrap this up, can you, in a very short, tell us what, in your view, are the low-hanging fruits that government or Namibia in general, young Namibians, unemployed Namibians, can reap from to address this issue of unemployment?
Well, you know, it becomes very difficult to determine what is that, because the situation looks so dire. But there are those few interventions that you mentioned earlier, which really benefits only the urban rich. What we can do right now is to push the issues through Parliament, as young elected MPs to Parliament, and we must take a two-legged approach. We must push first the issue through Parliament, and we must also push the issue on the streets through boardrooms and through other stakeholders that are involved in the larger issue of youth unemployment. You know, the issue is so complex that it cannot only be solved by the National Assembly and through Parliament, but it needs interventions from all stratas of society and through all tactics. So young people must remain steadfast. You have tasked us as young people in Parliament to resolve these issues, and we assure you that we are going to tackle this issue through the National Assembly with the vigor and rigor that it deserves.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Katjimune. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jemima, for the invitation.
Thank you for tuning in. Good night.